Hello and welcome to this edition of the Florida Writer Podcast. I'm your host, Allison Essen, and today I have with me Scott Mellor. I'm so glad you stopped by. Could you give our audience about a 60-second introduction of who you are and what you write?
My name is Scott Mellor. I like to write science fiction satire. It's one of my favorite topics to explore. And in that exploration of it, I wrote a book called The Adventures of Chevy Budweiser, which I'll be releasing soon. Political satire is a difficult subject to talk about because most people don't really want to talk about politics. It's one of those things we're not supposed to do. But in there, I try and bring everybody into enjoying and laughing about some of the things we all know are true about politics and some of the things that we all agree on. So that's what my goal is as a writer, to make people laugh, make people enjoy it, and to tell a story with interesting characters.
I'm personally a fan of interesting characters, but I want to know more about how you write a political satire. I guess the aim is to offend a little bit of everybody.
Well, a lot of it is playing on expectations. And so, for instance, if I say one of the opening lines is, humanity made one of the greatest mistakes they could possibly do. They elected a reality TV star as president. I say that happened several thousand years in the future, but obviously we're laughing at the joke because, the qualification is there, I don't want to get too much into what my political views are, but it is kind of funny just to think about the fact that, one of the qualifications is somebody was on The Apprentice shortly before they were elected at NBC. Of course, my character is nothing like that. Nothing to do with Donald Trump. He just happens to be named Chevy Budweiser and have been a reality TV star at some point in his life. Totally different.
Totally different, exactly. I mean, it'd be one thing if it was a Kardashian.
Well, I would think I would be very quickly moving to Canada to quote exactly the cliche thing to do right there.
Right. So tell me how you discovered writing.
I've always had journals since I was a little kid. I filled up journals and journals and journals and journals just about what I like to read and what I learned in life. And I used to write these just short little lessons, and that morphed into telling stories. One of the interesting things about my life is that I've always been a storyteller. I enjoy making people laugh, and I could do it in person. I could tell an interesting story, but I had never really gotten to the point where I could tell an interesting story on pages until I really sat there and dissected it. So I kind of I met with a lot of different authors around Houston. I got a lot of advice, and they kind of pointed me in the right direction. They said, well, this is funny, and then you have to figure out why it's funny, and then you go from there. And part of what we were talking about earlier before this podcast is one of the most interesting things about it is the aspects of the characters, not just what happens, but the characters themselves.
When you say the characters themselves, you're talking about the personality of the characters, their traits, their quirks.
Yeah. Who wants to read about a boring, flat 1D character? You want a little bit of mystery with it. You want a little bit of humor in it, and you want to make them feel like they're an actual person. If you don't do that, it usually falls flat on what's happening around them.
How do you actually implant, what's the word I'm looking for? Implant those qualities inside of a character that is flat otherwise on paper, but what do you do what's your favorite techniques? There you go, that's the question I'm looking for. What are your favorite techniques to actually bring a character to life?
Well, I pick a personality trait that is a stereotype at first. So if you have a nerdy guy, well, he's obviously nerdy. But if you throw in some fun things about, for instance, one of my characters lives in a bunker below the world, and the world's about to end. And this super nerdy, high-tech guy, we've all read about him, he's quick with an answer, he can figure everything out, realizes that he should have gotten a cat before the world ends. Because he's got no one to share his bunker with. And it's not a lot. It's not a huge detail, but if you let it linger there, hopefully it leaves the reader with something. It's like you might have prepared for everything about the end of the world except the loneliness.
I love that. He misses the idea that he should have had a cat. That is funny. You actually had me chuckling at that particular moment when you said that, because it isn't what you would think. The nerdy stereotype guy, and he's going to say, "Oh, I should have gotten a cat."
Yeah, and those are kind of the ways that we can do things in writing, where we can just add a little line at the end, and it changes your whole perspective on the character just by giving it that little "I'm a cat" person at the end. Or sometimes in writing, a character does something unexpected, and it's in line with what his character was, but you can show that through writing. And so sometimes another character of mine in another novel I'm writing, he goes to a jazz club, and he has no intention of doing music at all. No real hint at it, but as you're building up, you realize he loves music, and you just say he loves music, he loves music, he loves music. Everyone else loves this certain type of music, but this guy loves jazz. And just that little twist at the end made him more interesting than the other people around him. He'd rather go to the hazy, dark little jazz club and dance in a place he's not supposed to than go listen to electronica music or whatever kids are listening to these days. So he had this expectation set up that he was going to be like everyone else in his love of music. And then he turns out that, you know what, totally not. And you see that happen a lot in fiction.
When you're layering your ideas, meaning he likes music, he likes music, he likes music, is that hint dropped in various scenes, or is it more all in one scene and then that's how the scene tops out?
It's layered throughout the thing, throughout the novel. It's layered as in, and this is to switch a little bit of tracks. This is about a dystopian novel where part of the rebellion side of things is that the jazz club allows improvisational music. It allows a lot of dancing, and more importantly than that, it's colors. And this is kind of interesting. They're not allowed to print certain colors on their body. Sky blue being one of the forbidden ones. And in the jazz club, when a woman's skirt is folded and she twirls, you can see the colors they're not supposed to have. But when she's walking around normally, you can't see that. And so the music is kind of representation of what is forbidden. And that helps the character grow. And that's why he likes that place. But you don't outwardly say that. You just see the colors describe a jazz club, and the character loves it.
You're taking the thread and you're weaving it throughout the entire novel.
That's the goal.
That is the goal. It's not always the easy one, is it?
No.
Drop the hints. We're dropping breadcrumbs, right?
Little trails of traits of characteristics that just help him stand out a little bit more than normal. That's the goal.
I know that you are also interested in writing about the anti-heroes. How do you create an anti-hero versus a hero?
This is kind of an interesting way in my novel that I've done it. The novel normally would be the perspective of the guy trying to stop the end of the world. What does that guy look like to you? The guy trying to stop the end of the world is usually that chiseled, muscular, strong leader that is capable, that is well thought out. He's got a plan. And in my book, the leader is a slightly overweight guy who's got a touch of alcoholism, who doesn't take his job seriously. You have a way of growing his sense of humor and enjoying the adventure. And the person chasing him is the actual stereotype of the hero. An anti-hero has to break expectations. So you want to root for him, you want to like him, but you shouldn't. That's the general goal of an anti-hero. You find yourself falling in love with a character that you shouldn't root for. Do we want to root for the lazy guy who's unprepared, who has alcoholism? Well, what if he's really charming and funny? What if the situation is so absurd we can't help but root for that guy? Well, doesn't that make an interesting character? You find yourself relating to somebody you wouldn't want to. You'd never hang out with them, but in the context of that story, you don't want anything bad to happen to them. And so you're invested in somebody that you wouldn't hang out with.
In my head, I think anti-hero, automatically I go to antagonist, which is not the same thing. I understand that. But it is an interesting definition to think about anti-heroes as the person you'd rather not root for, but the one you can't help but cheer on at the end of a novel.
Yeah, that's kind of what I like. I think the expectation of rooting for somebody that you normally wouldn't root for, and getting to know the reasons why you like that guy, I think that's more fun to explore.
I would agree with you. As an audience member, I believe it would probably be more fun to read about as well, because we have our stereotypes. We have our heroes that we read about, the action adventure, and they go out and they save the world every single novel. And every single time they're put in these impossible situations, and yet they have incredible luck and they are able to save the world each and every time. But the anti-hero sounds like somebody who's not going to be part of a series. Is that true?
He will be part of a series, but I will give away this. It never goes the way that they think it's going to. He never gets to play the heroic role. He wants to. He tries. He seems like he's going to succeed, but he never quite gets to be the hero. And he stands in the way of it every time. And that's exactly, I think, where we all are in our own lives, where we get these moments where we can build, that we feel like we're ready to make the right decision, and then we do the wrong thing. We're just like, damn it, we're back to square one. And that's a little bit more human than getting the girl, the gold, the dragon, slaying the dragon, coming back home with the legendary sword forged in your enemies. Isn't it more fun to explore a guy who looks like he's going to win and then maybe doesn't?
It's definitely more realistic. I know that. I definitely know that. I feel it with my own children all the time. I think they are the anti-heroes in their own lives, or maybe they're the anti-hero in my life. I want to cheer them on. Sometimes I have a hard time. All right, I'm digressing. I take that back. My children are wonderful. I would like to.
They get straight A's, and then you come home to something broken in your house, and you're like, we were doing so good.
We were doing so well. What happened? No, my children are perfect. They are the heroes. That's all I'm going to give you.
Are you the anti-hero then?
Yeah, maybe I'm the anti-hero. You can read more about it at AllisonNissen.com. Anyway, actually, I don't think I've written about my adult children very much. I've written about my children when they were small and not so much when they're older, but I think that's to protect, I want them to come home for Thanksgiving dinners. I don't want them to not like me, so that's just to protect the relationship. All right, I really am going off subject. How about your favorite genre to read? Do you have a particular one you like to read?
This is going to sound probably not too shocking to you, but lately I've been reading essays on like George Orwell's articles on nationalism. I've been reading a lot of political works, The Shield of Achilles. I've been really reading about systems more than actual novels lately. But my favorite novel growing up was definitely Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Going back to my children, that was my son's favorite book as well. I think he read it maybe 10 times. It's falling apart in my library somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's timeless because it doesn't comment necessarily on, the universe as it is now, but it comments on the universal truths of humanity, One of my favorite quotes in there is there's a puddle on the ground and it thinks to itself, wow, this rock is made perfectly for me, and I can sit in this little puddle, and the sun is so beautiful, and everything lines up just so I can be this puddle, and then the puddle evaporates.
I can appreciate that line, and the fact that you can actually recite it is even more impressive, in my opinion. I'm not one of these people that memorizes all my lines. I might know one or two from things that I've taught because I've taught them so many times, but I love to talk about writing in different styles, and I want to know, how can someone actually create an anti-hero for their own stories?
If you want to write an anti-hero, the best way to do it is probably to start to pull apart your heroes. Everybody's got, and maybe even yourself, go ahead and think about somebody in your life who is one of your heroes and think about their flaws. Like, okay, wait a second. Were they this perfect golden image of a person, or were there things there that they didn't succeed at? For me, I like to build the anti-hero out of people I know. I like to take a character and I like to look at a person that I know and think of their actions and how in a novel I can show maybe a fault of somebody that is real. And that way I don't have to make it up. if you want to build an anti-hero, you can either look at maybe a hero's faults, or you can look at your own faults and say, you know what? What if my hero was incredibly disorganized and lost something important? And an anti-hero, you might want to look at and say, what about a characteristic in an antagonist? You know what, Allison, re-ask me that question. Give me a second.
You were doing so well.
I totally was, and I lost my train of thought. I completely snapped.
No, I love what you're saying about the anti-hero and just actually taking the person that you know and pulling them apart, because we do all have flaws. I know I've worked with several young writers, and one person in particular was insistent that her hero would be perfect. And of course, to make a believable hero, you have to make them have something that's not perfect about them. And it sounds to me like what you're really doing is the anti-hero is just more of a real person than the image of the hero that we have in our minds, the one that we've built up, and the one that doesn't have any flaws, so to speak. The one that is, I'm going to quote a commercial, but there's a commercial where this gentleman says, and the couple glows, and somebody else rebuts, who glows? And I think that's what it is, right? The heroes glow. The anti-hero doesn't glow. I think that's probably a good way to think about it or at least in my illogical brain. So Scott, we're going to shift gears and we're going to go to our rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Sure, go ahead.
If you were to stand up straight, could you touch your toes?
I'm going to test that real quick. Hold on a second.
All right.
Still got it.
You still got it. Awesome.
So the answer is yes.
Do you own any stuffed animals?
I do. I own one stuffed animal. It's in my closet currently. He has gone everywhere with me. I have moved 9 times in my life before I bought my house, and every time I've moved, I've carried one thing, and that is Puff the Magic Dragon. Puff the Magic Dragon. Is he green? He's green. He's got yellow. It's not a euphemism for weed. It's an actual stuffed animal, and I got it as a child. So every time I open that box, I forget it's even there, and then I see the Puff the Magic Dragon. He goes in a closet. I don't see him again unless I move. That's probably a safe place for him then. What is your favorite carnival food? Oh, well, that's the deep fried Oreo, and if you haven't had that, you really need to. It's not good for you. It will give you type 2 diabetes, but you know what? Have about 8 of them because you only live once. YOLO. All right, that's like anyone who's listening doesn't know what YOLO is you only live once. Yes, I had to ask a teenager what it meant, but I know now, so YOLO. I go for it. Although I think I'll pass on the fried Oreos. I just like regular Oreos. They're just fine for me. It could mean you only like Oreos. I do. I like regular Oreos. I have to ban them from my house or I'll eat the whole sleeve. Oh, I definitely start off in one sleeve is a good measure of self-control. If I can only eat one sleeve of Oreos, I've grown as a person. That's how it works, right? So the more mature we are, the less Oreos we feel compelled to eat. I think that's the goal, you know, as a human being, as I develop. If I get to like my 70s and I can only eat 3 Oreos and not eat until I'm uncomfortably full, I will have learned a lot about life. Yes, life is very challenging, especially when Oreos are involved. Everything in moderation. All right, Scott, is there a way people could get in touch with you if they wanted to know more about writing an anti-hero? Well, right, I'm going to be launching a website soon. I don't know what it's called yet, so that would be the problem. But I will I will have Allison send a link for the email. So if anyone wants to get in touch with me about writing or when this book is going to be released, feel free. And you'll find it at Amazon. It'll be The Adventures of Chevy Budweiser. That's the first book I'm going to release, and I plan on doing it within the month. So I'll leave from there, you'll be able to get a hold of me pretty easily. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for stopping by. You have been listening to the Florida Writer Podcast. Allison out. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Florida Writer Podcast. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit us on the web, floridawriters.net.